find it, I don't mind.
There we go.
There we go. Awesome. Okay, so we will begin. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar titled Community Podcasting for Climate Justice. So my name is Jacqueline Steele, and I am the Program Coordinator for the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, or NSCN. So for everyone not familiar, NSCN is a membership-based environmental nonprofit that was founded in 1991 to support dozens of diverse environmental organizations across Nova Scotia by facilitating communication, collaboration, volunteerism, and public engagement. We are proud to say that we currently have 43 active environmental organizations in our membership, and we are continuing to grow. So we support our members in many different ways. We distribute a monthly e-newsletter featuring news, calls to actions, events, and opportunities from across the network. We administer provincial caucuses where environmentalists can collaborate on shared environmental priorities. We also organize an annual meeting between our members and the Provincial Minister for Environment and Climate Change. Additionally, we also help our members reach a wider public audience with webinars such as this one, and among any other things as well. We have lots on the go. So please feel free to learn about NSCN, and we invite you to visit our website. So I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat. I have a link here to our website for those who are interested. Oh, that should be there. So let me know if you have any troubles accessing the link. So before we begin, I'm also going to give a land acknowledgement. So while we are the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, we acknowledge that what we currently call Nova Scotia is just one of the segments of the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, a territory known as Mi'kma'ki, which spans much of Atlantic Canada. So the Mi'kma'ki have been stewards of this territory since time immemorial as a sovereign nation recognized by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of the 1700s. The treaties did not surrender the inherent rights and title of the Mi'kmaq, but rather established rules for ongoing cooperation and respect between Mi'kmaq and the settlers. We must therefore respect and honor the rights of past, present, and future Mi'kmaq to retain title and remain stewards, protectors, and right holders of the Mi'kma'ki. So Indigenous voices and perspectives are critical to the environmental movement, and NSCN has been honored to work with environmental Mi'kmaq-led groups in our effort to build bridges and educate the public on sustainability. Now, I am very pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Sheena Cameron, who is the co-creator of Open Air Podcasting and holds a master's in communication and social justice, and is also a doctoral candidate in the social justice education at the University of Toronto. So now I will hand it over to Sheena.
Thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I really appreciate being asked to come today. I have a kind of insider connection. Jacqueline was a student of mine. I teach part-time at St. FX University as well, and she took a climate and environment course that I instructed. I guess it was almost 2 years ago, and so when I got an email from Jacqueline asking if it would be possible uh, to come in and kind of give this webinar, I was so honored that she thought of me. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm gonna share my screen. But I also just want to kind of building on what you were saying about the uh, the land acknowledgement that you gave. I think it's so important for us to do these, acknowledge this land. And I reside in the area that's close to Nelligitchguniitch, which is colonially known as Antigonish, but in the Eskegoagik district, or Skin Dressers district, which is kind of in the Guysborough area where I am. and kind of acknowledging how important it is as myself as a white settler, how important it is for me to, and as a treaty person, to also be really actively involved in addressing and righting the wrongs that continue to exist because of the legacy of colonialism and settler colonialism. And that's very much tied to what we're going to be talking about today, because climate justice is land justice, it is Indigenous justice, and as well as racial justice and gender justice. You know, all of these different elements are all connected and all tied to each other. And so um, land acknowledgements are not enough, but they are a small step to righting these wrongs and building relationships, which is also a key part of doing community podcasting or community-based podcasting. So I am going to just trying to figure out um, how to share a portion of my screen so I can still see my notes. I tend to ramble when I go off script, so I need to give myself a little prompt here and there. And I'll try not to take um, the full amount of the time uh, that we kind of allocated, just so that we have lots of time for questions. If we, oops. Now I'm editing my PowerPoint presentation as I'm doing this. All right, let me see. There we go. Can everyone see that? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. And is everyone hearing me okay? Okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm feeling really grateful that I was asked to come be part of the Nova Scotia Environmental Network's webinar series. I regularly have watched and seen these happening, and I always was so I thought that they were so wonderful. So to be asked, it just feels like a huge honor. Um, and also, yeah, I just want to like note that, like I mentioned, like Jacqueline was mentioning, that this work that I'm doing, that I'm a co-creator of what we call the um, Open Air Podcasting Initiative. So this initiative was created by myself and sorry, I'm just trying to sort out um, my slides and my notes here. Just a second. Bear with me. Yeah, so this initiative was created by myself and Nat Krieger. And Nat and I have worked together for many years, doing a lot of work together on, especially through community radio. And so we decided after doing a lot of this work together that we saw that there was this need to create a space for people, communities, particularly frontline communities, to learn about how to use podcasting to amplify their voices. So we began in 2021 to offer podcasting trainings to communities and people working to create social and environmental change. And really we wanted to make this podcasting accessible, and we wanted to do it in a particular way. And so I also kind of want to bring in the fact that we didn't do this alone, and we also didn't do it without the knowledge and the gifts that so many um, people have shared with us along the way, mentors, community organizers, community radio folks, particularly through Radio Ada, a community radio station in Ghana, and also through Social Justice Radio at St. Francis Xavier University. So because of this work and because of those connections and the origins with community radio, we really approach this work from a very particular kind of framework. And since 2021, we've done a number of projects that we've also learned from the folks that we've worked with along the way. So, for example, the Storytelling Initiative through McGill University, where we provided a 3-month podcast training to organizations and climate organizers in Nepal, Pakistan, Mexico, South Africa, the DR Congo, Colombia, Finland, and Canada. Um, we also have been really privileged to work with professors and future teachers through the education department at St. FX with an Accelerate grant a couple years ago, where we used podcasting to for climate change education to teach how podcasting can be used in classrooms by professors and by teachers, and how students can learn how to do this work, learn how to use podcasting as a form of climate change education. And that's also part of around that time was when I was working with Jacqueline. And then also through the Translocal Learning Network, which is a network of community organizations and social movements based in South Africa, Ghana, Guatemala, and here in Mi'kmaq, where we're supporting partners to learn how to use podcasting to share their own stories and to mobilize their communities. And then even last year, we were able to work with, and we've done kind of work with nonprofits in the past, but worked with for our kids to provide a training for folks like parents and grandparents and guardians of how to tell their stories for climate action. So our philosophy really does come from this kind of community-based grassroots way of looking at how to use podcasting. We tend to try to model kind of adult education principles where we see everyone as a teacher and a learner simultaneously, and where everyone is an expert in their own lives, and has knowledge and experience that they can share. So kind of, and also building on these ideas of adult education, we tend to look really towards these ideas of critical pedagogy and transformative adult education, where we believe the importance of critical consciousness, of like creating awareness about issues, how education is political, and that it's a really important tool for creating social change. So we really believe in the using storytelling through this process to create change. And we really try to ground the work and the way that we approach the work in ideas around and philosophies of social justice, really centering equity and just access for communities and people who have been socially excluded and traditionally silenced. And we also try to emphasize that even the process of creating the podcast is an opportunity to build community, build relationships, and even, for example, through an interview process. So even the reaching out and the ethics of interviewing and doing it in a way that's building relationships and creating connections through that process. We're not trying to make podcasts in a way that's like a news report or a kind of gotcha kind of reporting, but it's trying to create these spaces where we're actually creating platforms for communities to really share their firsthand experiences and stories and knowledge, and making it accessible along the way so that it's as much kind of low cost or no cost as possible for communities. So yeah, so today I guess we talked a little bit about the agenda earlier, and so what we initially advertised, where we would do the kind of breakout rooms and before the Q&A, we kind of switched that around a little bit, just so that we could have maybe a little bit more time for folks to ask some questions before, if they wanted to share their own stories. And if we have a small enough group, we can also just stay in the larger group, and then people, if you feel comfortable sharing stories toward the end, and kind of like, what brought you here? What do you want to share, and whose voices or issue were you thinking that this particular kind of storytelling could be really supportive or helpful for? So The first part of the webinar is really kind of looking at the concept and, what is community podcasting? Why do we want to tell stories for social change and climate justice? And then how to use podcasting and how to make an accessible or, sorry, an actionable story. So how do we want to kind of use the storytelling and the podcasting as a way of mobilizing communities and other people to take action? In the second part, it's about kind of creating a little bit of a kind of tips and tricks of, how do we make accessible recording and editing happen? So, what are some tips for gathering and recording sounds in a low or no cost way, including some free editing software that's available online to people? And then we'll have some Q&A. So this usually what we do for our trainings is a much larger, either over a series of components or sessions, or a longer time frame. And so this is more like an intro just to kind of get people thinking about this and how they might want to use this. And then we can also, if there's people who are interested in following up or having kind of like follow-up trainings, then we are happy to also work with you on that. So yeah, so we'll get started and to just kind of talk about, what are the developing the concept and how do we make the story actionable? So I'm sure many of you already know what a podcast is. But I just to kind of like, if you don't know, or if you're kind of like curious about it, podcasting has been around now for about 15 years. It's especially gained popularity in the last 10 years. And it's a one-off or a series of spoken word audio episodes that are focused on a particular topic or theme. So these could take forms like an interview style or digital storytelling, or really kind of a polished kind of almost like a documentary, kind of like an audio documentary in a way. And these are typically available as pre-recorded files that users can listen to on demand and can access on different streaming platforms. And so I can share some of those later as well if folks are interested but usually even on places like Spotify or Apple, you can find podcasts on there. So what is community-based podcasting? Well, we really believe that podcasting can be more community-based when it's situated in community, when it's community-driven, community-led, and when it's really handing over the mic to communities to tell their own stories, because we really believe that communities and community members are experts in their own lived experiences. So particularly for the way that we kind of work with communities or work with organizations to share stories is really an emphasis on how stories and storytelling is a really effective tool to create social change. So, because stories build community, they can build empathy and hope and create a human face or create humanity around these issues. It's not just an issue. There's people that are affected by these issues. That stories are personal. So there's a relatability factor and a connection that's usually created. When we listen to a story that someone is telling, you can hear emotion in someone's voices. We see the similarities in our struggles or in our shared humanity. And so we can engage and reflect and connect with other people based on that. And it also helps us feel less alone or less isolated. And stories are also educational. We learn new things. We're able to kind of reflect and create awareness. So these are very powerful tools for understanding even how our own experiences are political in nature. So the personal is political kind of that comes out sometimes as we're deepening our understanding about issues through listening to other people's stories that maybe are similar or maybe are even different. But stories have this power to stick with us. I think that we can probably all think back to either a podcast or even someone just telling a story that help us that really stuck with us, or that we're never really going to forget because of that human element that was part of that story. So it helps us to get new perspectives. It helps us to deepen our own understandings and even understand maybe ourselves or a person or a group or even the world in a different way, or in a deeper way. And so we feel that podcasts can make stories more accessible. So using podcasts, it provides a low cost, easy to kind of share and listen at any time and any place, way to learn about an issue and to learn about the kind of human element behind those issues. So, for climate justice podcasting, we also, we want to recognize that there are many different forms of information. So, there's facts that we can go to scientific data to look at, or research articles, or news articles and things like that that are giving particular information. But it can also take the form of feelings, perspectives, solutions, advocacy, and hope. And so we feel that by using podcasting for climate justice, it provides this really wonderful platform for voices and stories of frontline communities, of people traditionally silenced who have lived experiences, but also who are coming together to share their experiences of how they're mobilizing around not only the impacts of the climate crisis, but what are their tactics that they're using? What are the kinds of things that maybe the traditional media is not sharing, or government is maybe sharing or not sharing. And so really recognizing that climate change discourse and narratives really shape our understanding and our ability to act or feel like we can act. So podcast, when we're doing social or climate justice podcasting, it really can provide an opportunity to disrupt mass media's dominant narrative or kind of political narratives, biases and shortcomings that are coming out and that we understand, with regards to the climate crisis. And this is really an opportunity to engage and mobilize communities and social movements. So it gives communities kind of the power to shape the narrative and how they want to tell their own story. And it also has the potential of reaching a wider listenership to amplify issues, and to really reinforce a shared humanity and a collective future, um, and create hope. Because a lot of the despair that's coming out around the climate crisis is really making people feel paralyzed to act. But by sharing stories, personal stories about how communities are coming together and what's happening, it can actually have the alternative effect. So a recent example that I just recently saw in the last week or so, is how a campaign like the Leap Pictou County resistance to the gas plants is actually doing a really wonderful job of putting a human face on the issue and using firsthand stories and the experiences of impacted community members, to share and to mobilize people to care about the issue and to actually take action as well. And there's so many other examples of how this is happening, on social media or in documentaries, but podcasts also have a really wonderful way of doing that. So if we're thinking about, finding a way to create a podcast that then mobilizes people to action, we have to kind of think about how do we make this actionable? How do we engage and create kind of an effective story and a pathway so that people feel that they can take action. So we have to be really clear about not only tell the way that we're telling the story, but then also offering options for how people can take action along the way. And offering, like I mentioned, a sense of hope for the story, because if you're creating hope, then it makes people feel like it's actually possible to do something. And then creating pathways to action. How exactly are people able to get involved? Is it by signing this petition? Is it by coming out to this community rally? Is it by letter writing to your politicians, or asking for presentations with them or meetings with them? Is it by divesting? Various ways that folks can take action. And then finding a way to kind of make your podcast or your story shareable. So giving your audience, your listener, a meaningful way of participating, so that they feel that there are, these pathways that can help to get them involved. And when people feel like they have those ways to get involved, it feels like they can get involved in a more effective way. So another thing to think about in terms of developing a podcast is to think about the big narratives versus the smaller narratives. And so both of these are really important, and especially if we're thinking about developing kind of an effective campaign. The big narrative refers to the larger overarching story or theme, or even the purpose that's driving the podcast as a whole. So if you, for example, if you have a podcast series where each episode is kind of contributing to a larger story. That's one way of developing a podcast. But you could also just have a one-off podcast that tells the story, but also has the big narrative that threads throughout, and then the smaller messages that are also part of that story. Um, so the smaller messages are like the specific and focused ideas or insights that are emerging from the broader context of the big narrative. So these are kind of more bite-sized individual takeaways or points that contribute to the larger story, but can also stand on their own within a single segment or episode. Whereas, if we think about an example of a big narrative in a podcast, so for example, about climate justice, the big narrative might be about the ongoing struggle for global climate action, and the podcast could tackle different aspects of this issue, such as the history, the policy, personal stories, activism, cultural shifts. And so that could be done along different multiple episodes or within the same podcast segment. Another thing to think about in thinking about developing your story within and the podcast is thinking about what's your time frame. Are you going to do a series of episodes? Are you going to do just one episode? And so one of the things that we've learned over time is that kind of the sweet spot in terms of time of an episode is about 20 minutes, because that's a good amount of time for people to listen while they're doing something like commuting to work or doing a task at home. And so it kind of keeps people engaged. But when it goes longer than that, then, it really does require a bigger commitment. And so if you're doing multiple segments or episodes, having each segment as like 20 minutes, then that sometimes works out well to keep people hooked to continue listening. But if it's a one-off segment, you might want to consider having it up to like maybe 60 minutes or something like that to ensure that you're able to cover the whole topic. Another thing to think about is who's your audience. So who are you trying to connect with? Are you trying to create an educational platform, incite action, connect with your community? And then how are you going to hook people? How are you going to hook your listener to keep them engaged? If you're doing kind of multiple episodes, it could be something like sharing a teaser or a clip of audio from a future episode or a future, interview or of someone who might be coming on to share their story next. Um, it could be, using a soundscape or music, or kind of transporting the listener to a different into the scenario. So, for example, using like a rally to the sounds from a rally to really bring people in and learn about and keep them hooked to the episode. And it also could be the compelling stories that you're telling that keep them coming back. So think about like what keeps you coming back and kind of hooked to listening to your favorite podcasts or even shows. What is it that's keeping you coming back to those? And then think about, who are the featured communities and community members that are going to be involved in telling this story. So the other thing to remember is the kind of the way that we tell stories. There's almost like a natural progression that we usually don't even think about when we're telling them. So, there's the structure of the story, which is the beginning, middle, and end, which is here that's in this illustration of a narrative arc. So as you're telling the story, the tension is building as the issues and the arguments are being laid out. And then there's a natural resolution at the end that kind of wraps things up. It doesn't mean that necessarily everything's concluded. It just means that there's kind of some kind of resolution at the end of the story. Um, and so the beginning, like in the context of a podcast, might be about introducing the plot or introducing the issue, building the context for the audience, answering the why should I pay attention or why should I care kind of questions. Who are your protagonists or who are your communities who are going to guide the listener through the actions? And then the middle part of the story is kind of developing the what could be and articulate what could happen without any action. So, if this continues the way it's going, what are our communities going to look like? Or what kind of a livable planet are we going to have if we continue along this course in terms of the climate crisis? And then in this moment also involve your audience. Create an environment where you're generating empathy with a clear call to action. And then give your story an ending. Remind the listener of key points that you talked about along the way or messages and the resulting need for action. And then showing them those pathways to action. Like, what are the clear things that the listener can do to support? Where can they get more information? Where can they come out to support the work that's happening? So those are kind of the developing the concept and how to make your story actionable to mobilize communities. So we're now going to move into talking a little bit about the kind of accessible recording and editing. This is not going to take as long, so I know that the organizers might be getting a little antsy because we're going past the time. But just to say that the way that we try to support community-based podcasting is really advocating for a minimalist approach. A lot of people who do podcasting will tell you that you need really expensive recording devices and equipment, and we don't believe that that's the case. We know that you may be able to gather better sounds and things like that if you have that, but you can still tell a really wonderful and compelling story without having the equipment that is thousands of dollars. And so, for example, if you have a phone, you can record interviews and sounds on your phone. You can use Zoom and record like we're doing this evening, or you can record directly into Audacity, which, as I mentioned, is kind of the free software. And I'm just gonna drop the link for this free software into the chat if I can do that. Um, Maybe I can't do it if I'm sharing my screen. Sorry, I'm gonna send it to oops.
And if you need help, I can put it in the chat. I'm not
Yeah, that
sure.
would be awesome. Um, so it's just audacity.org basically.
Okay,
Um,
I will look for that.
Sorry,
That'll be nice.
audacityteam.org is the
Okay.
and I can get we can share that also with resources later. Um, yeah, so basically it really is possible to do this kind of work without needing to have expensive equipment. And so the other thing, just to think about in terms of creating a soundscape, and this is a lot of the time, this is how you're creating this way of transporting the listener into the place where this is happening. So, there's different ways of doing that. It could be that you're actually using the background sounds from a rally. And you're recording some of that, or some of the characteristic sounds that come from being in a different place. Like, you're at the legislative assembly and you're gathering sounds of like what's happening in those moments. Um, and so this is really to create the almost like a layering so that it gives people an ability to be kind of transported to that place and to elicit some emotion from just using the soundscapes. And then you can also even If you're a narrator or if there's a community person that's sharing, something that's happening, they can even kind of do that as like a stand-up setting of the scene where they're sharing, the five W's of like what's happening. So who's there, what's happening, where are they, when is it, and why is this happening? So this is a really effective way to also transport the listener and really layer the sounds to create soundscape. Another thing to think about are, different ways to create a good, solid, quality sound that doesn't require, expensive equipment, like I mentioned before. So, for example, recording in a quiet space within your home can be as easy as, recording something in your closet or in a space where there's not a lot of hard edges so that there's not a lot of echoing happening. Having an interview with somebody in your car if you have a vehicle because it actually has really good acoustics. And then thinking about, the placement of your microphone so that it's far enough, not too far or far enough away from your mouth or the person that's recording. Um, either using outside noise or finding a place that's quiet to reduce the echo and the background noises as well. And so there's lots of tips like that that are really effective in creating spaces. And you want to think about this also in terms if you are doing interviews and whatnot, finding ways to even think about like the volume of your speaker and how loud they're speaking, and then altering the way like where you're holding the microphone. Having interviews outside at rallies is great, but not if it's in the like wind where you're, where that's the sound that you're hearing. So kind of finding ways to do that. So these are just a few things that I wanted to share about kind of ways to start thinking about creating your stories. There's lots of additional resources out there and opportunities for trainings. These are a couple, and we'll share these later. These are a couple podcasts to check out that are, a lot of them really kind of create some story-based or create some opportunities for kind of more hopeful based podcasting. Um, and then if you are interested, in further follow-up training, because I know we're now at time, please feel free to reach out to Nat or I. We have our kind of open air podcasting email there. And then we also have our other emails as well. But I really want to thank everyone for listening to my presentation. And I do really want to also thank the Nova Scotia Environmental Network and Jacqueline particularly for providing this opportunity to share this information. Yeah, and so I wanted to now kind of give folks an opportunity to ask any questions that might be coming up, or even, as we're kind of getting to time, and we also have a pretty small group, we could even have maybe have an opportunity for anyone that wants to even introduce themselves and, what it is that brings you here, what's interesting, or how do you think that you could apply these concepts to an issue that you're dealing with, or, a community-based kind of story that you'd like to share. Yeah, and any other questions that you feel hopefully I'll be able to answer them. Yeah, so I'm gonna I'm gonna stop sharing maybe, and then I'll open it up for questions.
I just want to say that I really appreciate your presentation, Gina. That was really informative. And I was kind of, I guess because I kind of learned about it before in my class, which I'm very thankful that I got the opportunity to learn about this. I was just wondering, like, what's something like a future goal you have with podcasting? Like, what's something you want to accomplish with this?
Oh, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that because I'm teaching part-time, I'm I really enjoy bringing podcasts into my classrooms because I feel like it gives students the opportunity to explore kind of a creative outlet or creative way of expressing themselves around these issues. And I think that that's like a huge obstacle for a lot of communities is feeling like they have the platform to share those experiences and those voices. And so I think that particularly for students, learning this as a skill is something that I really enjoy doing. But I also I've been really now working more and more with community organizations and grassroots movements, and I feel like I want people to have this information so that they can use it in whatever way that they can. And Nat and I always talk about how we feel weird, like we're not experts, we're also learning along the way, but whatever knowledge we have has been shared with us. And so we feel like a duty and obligation to also pass that on to other people so that they can use it in whatever way they can. Yeah, thanks. Oh, I see Sabrina has her hand up. Oh, yeah, I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Too many screens. It's lovely for me to join. I used to work at NSCN back in 27, oh no, 2020 during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And Sheena, we might have met briefly. I worked with John Langdon,
Oh, yes, we
a
did.
research assistant. Yeah, when I lived in Halifax. So
That's why I
feels like a
recognized your
lifetime
name.
ago. I'm now at UVic. And I was
Wow.
curious. I wanted to join this because I'm supporting a course that's like a community engaged learning course. And we just had the first iteration of the course run this term. And it won't be run again until like spring of 2027. And so we're considering having like students do podcasts as an assignment. I'm
Yeah.
just curious to hear a bit more, I guess, like this might be boring for other people, but like how do you assign that? Like how do you assess it? Like those sort of things? Because basically we have partners that they do projects with. And so it could be that they interview those partners. It could be that they find other people that they want to interview.
Mhm.
But the course is around change making skills for thriving communities. And so
Oh,
it's a
that's
very
great.
broad, could be environmental, could be more social justice focused.
Yeah, thank
It's like a
you.
fourth year course for context.
Yeah, that's great. I love this because that's I do that in all of my courses, and Jacqueline can attest to whether it went well or not. But yeah, I think it's a really effective way because I know that it's sometimes challenging to I don't usually grade people based on like necessarily like their creative or technical skills. It's more about like the content and the way they approached the work and the story that they told, or the information, the way that they structured it. And I usually try to include like a critical analysis or reflection piece that they include as well. So I'm seeing how they're mapping that out along the way. And then I usually ask them to write a kind of written assignment, like just a brief summary of what they did and what they enjoyed and what was challenging and those kinds of things as a bit of a personal reflection about it as well. Yeah, and we can talk
Well,
more about that if
yeah.
you're
Do you
interested.
ever have them do them in teams? Like,
Yeah,
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 okay, cool. Guess that's another thing we're considering, but I'll let somebody else ask a question.
yeah. Thanks. I see Jackie has a hand up. Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, yeah, somebody else also asked the question of like where do you I think like where do you put a podcast so that people can hear it? You mentioned like Apple or Spotify, and I wondered if that's like where you would recommend putting that. Also, I would just like in your experience, and I realize this probably varies with experience, but if you were to, you talked about like a 20-minute kind of being like a good amount of time for a podcast. And I wondered like editing a 20-minute podcast, like in your experience, just like to be realistic, like how long might that take in terms of like, say you're, because because this I think ties into like maintaining momentum, so it's
Mm,
like you might have a really great idea, like even when you're talking about like Leap and Picto, was
yeah.
thinking like how to use podcasting for climate activism. So it's like you could tell like a big story, but then it's also like it's it's a lot of work
Yeah.
also. So I just like how do you like kind of balance the like excitement around telling the story and the reality of like volunteer
Yeah.
time or capacity also in terms of like
Hmm.
learning the skills that are required. But anyway, I guess if you had any thoughts about any of that, and also, yeah, that question of like, where is the best place to post this
Yeah.
so that it's accessible? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Those are great questions. And we usually talk about stuff like this, but then obviously we didn't have a lot more time. But yeah, I mean, there are podcast hosting platforms that are kind of free-ish, or that, do have a large listenership that, a lot of people might use, but there might be some ethical concerns around using them, like, Apple and Spotify. There are places like there's good podcasts, like there's a few RSS feeds, like that you can actually even pay for like a hosting platform, and you can usually get like 20 to 30,000 downloads, like depending on where it is and what it is, and so I can share some more information about that later, but um yeah, I mean, I think that there are places that you can also post it that's maybe people are gonna just more naturally go to, like a website or a personal blog or an organizational space. It could be on Facebook or other kind of social media or even YouTube. A lot of people are doing video podcasts and then hosting them on YouTube. Um, but even, sharing them to like community radios in your area, or even sometimes connecting with other podcasters or other, coalitions that are doing similar work, and asking if they could, share or feature your podcast as well. But yeah, the kind of like traditional places where folks are going to find podcasts are places like Spotify and Apple. Um, but yeah, I can share some other places as well with you if you're interested. And in terms of like time and kind of maintaining momentum or energy around it, yeah, I think that with experience it does become faster, but it's like it is a big kind of learning curve when you first get started. um, Seeing the kind of audacity, I think I shared the link to you before, and it is a bit daunting because of all the like technical, but there's really great YouTube videos to help people to like really learn some of using how to use Audacity in a like a more kind of accessible way. And if there's a specific thing, there's like specific videos, like short clips on how to do that as well on YouTube. So, and I think that's probably if you do like a, an 1 hour interview or a 30-minute interview, and then you cut it, you wanted to cut it down to 20 minutes, and doing all the editing and everything around that, it's going to take a few hours, like for each 20-minute kind of episode. Depending on, what kind of music or soundscapes you're bringing in, or what kind of the, if it's like a narrated or more polished kind of podcast, or but yeah, I would say trying to find ways to keep it manageable is especially important, because and also because events are shifting and issues are shifting so quickly. You want to make sure that it's nimble enough that you're getting the information out quickly to mobilize people and maintain that momentum. Because I remember doing a podcast for um, the Green Nova Scotia First a couple years ago, and I interviewed them, and then like almost just a month after, I was still working on the like editing because I was doing it kind of voluntarily in my spare time. And within like a month, this landscape of it had shifted and changed. And so I had to like kind of add an update, like when I was putting it together. And so, yeah, it's like, how do you keep that going and get the information out quickly, and making sure that it's manageable, for particularly if it's a volunteer kind of based endeavor. So Yeah, it's a bit of a struggle at first to manage that, but I think over time you find ways to keep it realistic. And I personally I'm a recovering perfectionist, and so I've had to like really get like used to just like letting the okay, that's okay that that sound is there. I'm not gonna worry about that or Um, even just like hearing the sound of your own voice, at first is just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to listen to that. For some people, it's like it's an issue, but you just kind of get used to it, and with experience, you learn how to kind of find shortcuts and ways to do it quickly. Hopefully, that was helpful. Thanks, Jackie. Any other questions, or is anyone interested in kind of sharing a story that they were hoping to use podcasting for? I think we only have a couple minutes left. And if you don't feel comfortable also asking questions in this sphere, you can also email me. I think there'll be kind of resources shared afterwards that you can follow up and send me an email as well. Hi, Mary. I see a hand. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. This was lovely. I'm just dabbling in the moment, but I certainly have discovered within myself a real passion for environmental issues and in particular animal justice,
Mm,
and especially in regard to agriculture. So that has been kind of I've been working towards increasing my understanding. However, it's a very emotionally tied
mm,
um, so as an example, on Facebook, you'll often see these very pristine pictures
mhm,
of cattle, dairy in particular, seem to be roaming, lots of straw, beautiful family, and it looks like a love, very caring, compassionate business. But truth be told, it's not. It is a business, and they use cows for their livelihood. So in terms of what advice could you give me so that I can get to a point where I'm not so negatively charging people, because I do want it to be a conversation, sort of
mm.
an opening, an awareness. So I'd appreciate what you would offer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, I think that a lot of these, and when we're thinking about the climate crisis, a lot of these issues are really personal and emotional. And I think the like webinar that happened a couple weeks ago was kind of talking about how by Yvonne Drouin, how kind of how to deal with climate anxiety and things like that. The grief and the loss that is part of all of this, and how emotional it is. And I think that um, for for this kind of work, I feel like yeah, you have to kind of have a bit of a balance where you want to make sure that you are kind of connecting people with that, but at the same time not pushing them so far that they also become paralyzed because of the grief. So finding ways of sharing, personal stories or issues that are happening within the work that you're doing, but also making sure that you're creating like the space for hope. Because I think that leading with from a hope-based way of telling the story, that like it does still show that there are, if people start to take action more, or if change is made and policies change and whatnot, that we will actually see more and more change. And so finding ways to do that and really kind of grounding the stories from a place of hope is what really keeps me going as well, because otherwise I would also get really, I think, really upset all the time about what's happening. So thank you, Mary, for sharing that. I think it is a bit of a balance, and like trying to find that space to have those conversations, but that still continues to have hope.
Thank you. I think we're just about out of time. So I just want to thank you again for coming today and offering this really informative presentation. And thank you to everyone else who came out and participated in the discussion and got to attend. So a recording of the webinar will be emailed to everyone who's registered if you'd like to rewatch it later or share with others. And we'll include some links and some contact information as well. So the email will include links to donate and also become an NSCN member if you're interested. And if you'd like to get involved or support our work. So thanks again, everyone. And we'll sign off. But if there's anyone who has any more questions, feel free to email it to us or to Sheena, and we can come up with an answer for you as best as we can.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.